The morning Sandra found out, she was already late for work. She had stopped at the pharmacy on Lagos Island the way you stop somewhere you do not want to be seen. Head low, hoodie pulled forward, paying cash. She told herself it was nothing. A late cycle, nothing more. She had been under stress. The fasting, the early morning prayers, the 3 years of declaring scriptures over a life that refused to move. Stress did things to a body. That was all this was. It was not all this was. She sat in the bathroom of a small clinic off Broad Street and looked at that test for a long time. 2 lines, clear as a verdict. She turned it over, turned it back. The lines did not change. She was 32 years old, unmarried, renting a 1-room apartment in Surulere with a ceiling fan that wobbled and a landlord who knocked too early. She had a job at a logistics company that paid just enough to keep her from going home and not enough to make her feel like anything was working. She had been fasting every Monday for 3 years, praying for direction, for breakthrough, for the one clear sign that her life was about to turn. And now she was sitting in a clinic bathroom holding a positive pregnancy test from a man who had stopped returning her calls 6 weeks ago. This was not the sign she had asked for. The nurse was kind in the way that clinical people are kind, measured, careful, practiced. She slid a pamphlet across the desk without drama. She said the word options the way people say it when they mean one specific option. Sandra looked at the pamphlet and did not pick it up. Something in her chest would not let her hand move toward it, and she did not fully understand why. She was not ready to be a mother. She was not in a position to be a mother. Every practical thought she had told her the nurse was right. But she left that clinic without making any appointment. She walked out onto the street and the noise of Lagos hit her immediately. Danfo horns, someone selling pure water, a preacher on a megaphone 3 streets away declaring that God had not forgotten anyone. She stood on that pavement for a full minute and did not move. A woman brushed past her with a baby tied to her back, the child sleeping deeply against the noise and heat, as though the world was nothing but warmth. Sandra watched them disappear into the crowd. She called her office and said she was sick. Then she sat in a small buka near CMS and ate jollof rice she could not taste, and tried to make a decision that her mind kept refusing to finish. Every time she reached the end of the thought, something pulled her back. Not a voice, not a vision, just a quiet, stubborn resistance she could not explain and could not argue with. She did not tell anyone for 3 weeks. She lost 4 kilograms. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping through the night, moved through her days at the office like a woman carrying something heavy and invisible. Her colleague Temi asked twice if she was all right. She said yes both times. She sat in church on Sunday and could not sing. The words felt too large for her mouth and too far from where she actually was. On the 23rd day, she called her mother. This was not a simple thing. Sandra and her mother had not spoken properly in 2 years, not since Sandra had decided that Enugu was too small, that her mother's expectations were too heavy, that the only way to become who she needed to become was to put distance between herself and everything familiar. She had built that distance carefully. Phone calls that shortened over time, visits that stopped happening. A silence that neither of them had formally agreed to, but both of them had accepted. Her mother picked up on the 2nd ring. Sandra had planned to ease into it. She had rehearsed something careful and measured on the bus. But the moment she heard her mother's voice, unhurried, warm, carrying that specific Enugu cadence that Sandra had spent 2 years trying to forget, everything rehearsed dissolved. She told her everything. Her mother was quiet through all of it. Sandra kept talking to fill the silence, stumbling, repeating herself, half expecting interruption, half expecting judgment. It did not come. When she finally stopped, her mother took a slow breath and said, "Come home." Not, "What are you going to do?" Not, "How did this happen?" Not, "I told you Lagos would do this to you." Just, "Come home." Sandra came home. She moved back into the house she had grown up in, back into the room with the blue curtains her mother had never changed, back into a life she had decided was too small for her. She felt like failure dressed in maternity clothes. She expected her mother to treat her like a cautionary tale. Instead, her mother treated her like a woman who needed rest. Those months in Enugu were the quietest Sandra had known in years. She slept, she ate properly, she sat on the veranda in the evenings and watched her mother tend the small garden at the back of the house. Tomatoes, garden egg, a row of utazi her mother had planted the year Sandra's father died. She had never paid attention to that garden before. It had always been background, wallpaper, part of the Enugu life she was in such a hurry to leave behind. Now she watched it every evening. Her mother never rushed. She planted things without expecting immediate results. She watered even when nothing was visible above the soil. She talked to the plants in a way that embarrassed her the first time she witnessed it and moved her deeply by the third. One evening, she asked her why she bothered talking to things that could not hear her. Her mother looked at her for a moment and said, "Everything that is growing can hear what you bring to it." Sandra thought about that for a long time. Her daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in March in the same hospital where Sandra herself had been born. She weighed 3 kilograms and 200 grams. She came out screaming, furious and magnificent, and the moment the nurse placed her on her chest, something shifted in Sandra's body that she had no language for. Not happiness exactly, larger than happiness, more permanent, like a door opening into a room she had not known existed and immediately understood was the most important room in the house. She named her Chisomaga, God is with me. The weeks after the birth were hard in ways Sandra had not prepared for. The exhaustion was physical and oceanic. There were nights she sat on the edge of the bed feeding the baby and crying without knowing exactly why. Not from sadness, but from some kind of overwhelm she could not name. Her mother would appear in the doorway sometimes without being called and just sit with her, not talking, just present. Sandra began to understand that this was its own kind of gift, the presence of someone who did not need you to explain yourself. During those quiet months, something else began to happen. Sandra had always been the person people called when they needed to think something through. At the logistics company, junior staff came to her not just for work problems, but for life problems. How to talk to a difficult manager, how to handle a family pressure, how to decide between two paths. She had never thought of this as anything significant. It was just conversation, just listening, just asking the right questions until the other person found their own answer. But sitting at home in Enugu with a newborn and more silence than she had known in years, she began writing, not deliberately. She started as a way to process her own confusion, typing long notes to herself at 2 a.m. while Chisomaga slept. About the pregnancy, about the decision she almost made, about what the quiet had taught her, about her mother's garden, about seeds. She posted one of the notes on a WhatsApp status, almost by accident. 17 people messaged her before morning. By the end of the week, it was being shared by people she did not know. Women writing to tell her, "This is exactly what I needed to hear." Women writing to say, "I thought I was the only one who felt this." Women writing to say, "Who are you and where have you been?" Sandra sat with Chisomaga on her lap and read every single message. She thought about 3 years of fasting and declaring and waiting for the big answer, the clear sign, the open door that looked like an open door. She thought about how certain she was that the answer, when it came, would come loudly, a job offer, a connection, a moment of undeniable clarity. She thought about the pamphlets she had not picked up, the appointment she had not made, the resistance she could not explain. She thought about her mother talking to seeds in the ground. She started writing consistently after that. A small blog first, then a newsletter, then a community of women who gathered online every week to talk about purpose and confusion and faith and the gap between where they were and where they believed they were supposed to be. She called it the quiet answer. Within 18 months, it had grown beyond anything she had planned. Brands reached out, speaking invitations arrived, a publisher in Lagos contacted her about a book. She did none of it from an office in Lagos Island in a rumpled blouse, running late, fasting on Mondays, and waiting. She did all of it from a veranda in Enugu, with a garden behind her and a little girl learning to walk on unsteady legs across the compound. Her mother lived to see the book launch. She sat in the front row of a small hall in Enugu, dressed in her best Ankara, and Sandra watched her from the stage and could not speak for a moment. 2 years of silence between them. 2 years she could not recover. But she had this hall, this evening, this woman in the front row who said, "Come home," without asking any questions. Her mother died 14 months later, quietly, like she had lived. Sandra was with her. Chisomaga was 4 years old when she climbed into Sandra's lap one Sunday evening, the light going gold outside the window, and pressed her small hand against her mother's and asked, the question children ask when they are old enough to understand that their parents have stories. "Mommy, tell me how I came." Sandra held her for a long moment. Then she said, "You came when I had stopped understanding what I was asking for. I was praying for a big answer, a loud one, something I could see clearly and hold and say, yes, this is it. But God knew I needed something that would make me be still, something that would bring me home, something that would grow slowly and quietly